Trishelle Gleason, Assistant City Clerk, you are hereby directed to call a special session of the City Council to be held on Monday, July 31st, 2023 at 5:30 p.m. in the Historic Federal Building for the purpose of conducting such business that may properly come before the City Council, as well as work sessions on Historic Millwork District Master Plan Update and Inclusive Dubuque and Project Hope quarterly updates.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome to a special session of the Dubuque City Council for July 31st, 2023. As a reminder to viewers and listeners, due to the nature of tonight's meeting topics, public input is not accepted. However, you may contact the City Council directly from the city's website at www.cityofdubuque.org/council contacts. Attendance at tonight's special session is as follows. Mayor Kavanaugh?
Here.
Council members Farber?
Here.
Jones?
Here.
Resnick?
Here.
Roussel?
Here.
Sprank?
Here.
Wethel? Here. City Manager Van Milligan?
Here.
City Attorney Brumwell?
Here.
Okay. First item on the agenda is new Iowa law related to public nuisance bars.
Mr. Mayor,
Ms. Roussel.
I move to receive and file and listen to the presentation.
Second
by Sprank.
A motion by Roussel, second by Sprank. Where am I going? Mike, coming to you?
Nope, you're coming to me.
Coming to you. Krenna, thank you very
Coming
much,
to me.
Krenna.
So we don't have a formal presentation for you tonight, but I wanted to share some information and have chiefs chime in wherever he felt that it would be valuable, and then we could answer any questions you have. But during the 2022 session, the legislature passed a law that had been proposed, I think, a number of times prior, related to what they call public safety nuisances, and specifically public safety nuisance bars, so establishments that have liquor licenses. So what I shared with you is a copy of the bill, the legislation itself, a copy of the Iowa Alcoholic Beverage Division code section where that is implemented for their purposes, and then a couple articles about Davenport and Des Moines who have advocated for and have used this already. So Davenport was the primary advocate for this code section, but it very well could have been us because the scenarios that they were trying to address is a scenario that we have dealt with before. It's been over 10 years ago, but we had a situation where we denied a liquor license, and we took that all the way to hearing in front of an administrative law judge in Des Moines. And at that time, the decision of the council was overturned because of the parameters or the bounds within the law, which meant that if you look at a liquor license premise and the licensed premise, it has kind of a map for the establishment. And at that time, the problems that we were dealing with were beyond the four corners of that sketch or building or facility. And it didn't go out into, say, the parking lot or the sidewalk area, the public right-of-way, the surrounding adjacent area. So what this law does is it actually corrects that, and it adds a tool to the toolbox for us. And so the acts can happen on the licensed premises or in any parking lots or areas included but not limited to public rights-of-way adjacent to the licensed premises. Now, it then lists some very specific types of violations that would come into play to make an establishment a public nuisance bar. That's unlawfully discharging a firearm or using an offensive weapon, as it's defined in the code, regardless of whether there's injury or death. Assaulting another person with a dangerous weapon, resulting in injury or death. And engaging as a riot on at least 3 separate occasions in any 12-month period where a peace officer is called to respond for purposes of dispersing the folks that have gathered within the boundaries of the law, the riot definition, and people who then willingly join in or remain, they don't have to be the same people for each incident. So it could be entirely different groups of people on each occasion. If any of those things happen in the establishment, in the right-of-way, parking lot, adjacent area, etc., it gives both the county attorney and the city attorney the authority to file suit in equity in district court. And if that happens, what we would be seeking would be abatement of the public nuisance that the establishment is creating in the community. And if we ever use this to deem a bar a public nuisance, a licensed establishment, once that petition is filed in the district court, there's an obligation on the city to notify the administrator of the alcoholic beverage division. And at that point, they put temporary restrictions on the establishment, which would modify their hours so that they could be open no later than 10 p.m. during the pendency of this action. So while it would be pending at district court, the state would put that parameter on the licensed establishment. The district court then makes a decision after hearing all the evidence, and it has to be by clear and convincing evidence. That's the standard of proof required. If the court does that, they can order abatement. And abatement could take a multitude of different forms, but for example, it could include an injunction. It could include parameters related to things with input from the alcoholic beverage division. And that abatement order can be for up to 2 years. So it could be temporary closure, it could be revocation of the license for a period of time, required changes to business practices or operations, or posting of a bond. So those are kind of the parameters that are out there. But we realized that we had never given you any information on this. And as we go through, the police department does the annual renewals for the liquor license establishments. And they go through like the calls for service and the type of things that they have responded to there. And so we just wanted to make sure that even though you don't have a specific role to play in this process, we wanted you to be aware of it because it is an added tool to the toolbox, and we may have to exercise use of that tool one day. So, Chief, did I miss anything there?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so that's essentially just a summary, and we could certainly answer any questions you might have.
Great. Thank you very much, Krenna. Do we have any questions?
I just have
Yeah,
one.
Ms. Farber.
So Krenna, could you verify restaurants versus bars for us and what it pertains to?
So it defines licensed premises as a premises where alcoholic beverages are authorized to be sold for consumption on the licensed premises and where the serving of food is only incidental to the consumption of alcoholic beverages on the premises. So I think further in the alcoholic beverage division section of the state code, there's some further kind of parsing out of that where it talks about percentages of food versus alcohol, but this is geared primarily at alcohol. And Trisha's just given me a lovely note because she knows this. It's 35%. So if more than 35%, it's less than 35%, I believe, is food, then you would be subject to this.
Okay, thank you for
Yep.
that clarification.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Resnick.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. So what are the liquor license establishments, what are they required to do? Are they supposed to have a security or have bouncers or refuse problem customers or this is a challenge for both the city and for the establishments. So what do we require and what kind of burden do they have?
Do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I can. There's a whole bunch of things under the code that they have to do. So, I mean, simply they have to obey all the laws that go with it. So they can't serve, a big one, can't serve intoxicated patrons. You can't have fighting in there. The owners or the bartenders can't be fighting or beating people up. There's a number of things with that. So you start to run into this is not just designed to just go out and for us to spot check these. These are ones where they're routinely getting problems, where you're getting calls on these. The ones that essentially turn where they're just unsafe. And sometimes some of these establishments just can't deal with it on their own. They need some help to deal with that.
So one thing I would just add to that is that we do compliance checks related to make sure, for example, that there aren't minors in bars, excessively intoxicated people, things of that nature. We do have, when there have been violations historically, we've entered into agreements with certain establishments and we work with them to figure out what works for them. So it's a little customized or tailored to them. So in some instances, people have added bouncers at the door. In some instances, they already had bouncers, but they've added ID scanners because they weren't catching minors or fake IDs when people were trying to come in the establishment. So we do try to work with people related to enforcement anyway if there's a non-compliance issue.
Yeah, before, most of the time, so pretty much all the time, you will have worked with the establishment ahead of time to try to figure out other things before we get to this point on that. But yeah, there's a number of things, and kind of alluded to that. There's like tips training. We make sure you get your bartenders and staff tips training, the scan, how to get the proper IDs and things like that, and help them find apps or if there's ways they can do things. Even years ago, how to get the black light flashlights so they can make sure that the IDs are real and things like that. So there's a number of things we'll work with them on to try to help them so they can succeed, quite frankly, and so that we don't have these unsafe environments that, and it really is geared towards these large disturbances or weapons or violence. I mean, that's what it's geared towards. So.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Sprang.
Thank you. This question would be for you, Chief. So now that this law has been passed by the state, is there an establishment that's closed that you would think that this would have affected currently? Or does it, because I don't want to badmouth any current businesses because that's their livelihood. But if there's a business that's been closed for a while, that's not going to reopen, of course. Would that business, can you think of one off the top of your head that would maybe?
Yeah, and Corinne alluded to that about 10 years ago. We had that establishment where we could have used this because this is exactly the riotous behavior, the violence, and that kind of thing. And because it was literally happening on the sidewalk, street, and parking lot, and if something happens at a bar, generally things get pushed outside almost right away, and that's where that kind of where most of the stuff happens. So.
I have one question. I may have missed this, but how are businesses being informed of this? The bars themselves? Is it something that is on the state to inform them since the code changed, or are we doing that as a city?
So I did check with the ABD to find out if they had any education pieces available on this because I thought that what a good resource to provide to you as part of this item. And they do not have anything specific that they are making available or putting out for public information. So that also was a little bit of the impetus of getting this on the agenda and thinking that this information could then be shared and spread throughout the community. So there was some awareness.
And this won't affect most bars in the city. And,
Sure.
if we see even like once, say, riot, weapons, that kind of thing, we're going to be meeting with them and see if there's something that we can prevent it from happening again.
Sure.
So hopefully we don't get to this point of multiple violations.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you very much for the information. We really appreciate it. It's good to be caught up on that. All right. Seeing no further questions, the motion is to receive and file. Hear that presentation. Trish, would you call the roll, please?
Roussel,
Aye.
Barber,
Aye.
Resnick,
Aye.
Wethel,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
Sprank,
Aye.
Kavanaugh.
Aye. Motion passes 7-0.
Next on the agenda, we have a work session number 1 regarding the historic Millwork District Master Plan update. And Jill Connors, you can take it away now.
Thank you. Jill Connors, Economic Development Director here at the city. We're going to present to you the updated Millwork District Master Plan report, and then this will give you an opportunity to ask questions and give us your input. And if we believe that this is something that the council would feel comfortable adopting, then we will bring that to you in short order to do that at a regular session. Karna, I have a question for you. We were initially planning on an hour. I don't know what time it is, but are we free to go past 6:30 a little bit if need be?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. I just want to make sure so that we didn't lose some time with you to present this. So I'm going to have Andrew Dressner from Bolton and Mank come out and present the information to you. Thanks.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. Can you hear me okay? I might raise this just a little bit. Okay. Thank you very much. As Jill mentioned, my name is Andrew Dresner. I'm with Bolton and Menk, and we are working on the update to the master plan for the historic Millwork district. So what I have here is, and what you received, I believe, in your packet, is the draft plan as it stands. I'll try to keep it about 15, 20 minutes or so. Presentation, just an overview of the items. I'll go a little bit deeper than the high-level items, but I'll try not to get too far into the weeds. And then available for questions or any discussion that you may have. Fair enough? Okay. Let's see here. Uh-oh. Okay. So this project started, I don't know, 10 months ago or so. And the purpose of it was really, it's not to redo the original master plan that was completed 10 plus years ago. It's really to take stock of where you are with the district and to make adjustments as needed. It's at a good time because it gives us the opportunity to assess some of the impacts of COVID, the pandemic, and the post-COVID economy on the district. Of course, those are what we know about post-COVID economy kind of changes weekly. So actually what we know now is different from what we knew when the project started. So, and thirdly, to ensure that the district is guided by its many stakeholders. And that's an important feature of this plan because the stakeholders are more varied and more diverse than they were 14 years ago. Or 10 years ago, because as you recall, there were almost no stakeholders in the district when the original master plan was done, or very few, I should say. But now that the residents, businesses, visitors, et cetera, there are more stakeholders. And then also to kickstart the next cycle of redevelopment. Redevelopment paused a little bit before COVID, and then during COVID, sort of this remained on pause. So this is also partly about just kickstarting that next cycle. And when I say cycle, we'll say 10 years. Hopefully we are in these sort of 10-year cycles of growth with a little bit of a lull back to 10 years. But that's also a bit of foreshadowing that's a little dangerous, but suffice to say cycles. Pardon me. Okay. So geographically, I think most of you know the district. It's simply a triangle on the edge of downtown between, we'll say, Main Street and the viaducts. It consists of somewhere in the range of 12, 13 blocks. And within there is somewhere in the range of 1.5 million square feet of building space. About half of that, or we'll say 700,000 or thereabouts, has been developed to date. So the DePaco project, Caradco, et cetera, et cetera. It's important to state that this first wave, or the first cycle of redevelopment, the past 10 years or so, was done in part, or in no small part, by the city's redevelopment incentives that went in to help it along. 13 million in incentives, as well as $23 million of public infrastructure. And that public infrastructure came in the form of new streets for half of the district, parking structure, intermodal facility, et cetera. And together that brought into the district somewhere in the range of $130 million of private investment. So it's a real success story on a public-private partnership, and a necessary one in any downtown redevelopment project like this. So comparing 2010 to 2023, 13 years later, the buildings are cleaner. They're now occupied. They're still there. A couple were demolished, but not many. So in some sense, the physical transformation, unless you look closely, doesn't look like a huge transformation, but it really was. Though the buildings are there, they're now actually many of them are fully redeveloped and occupied. And we have now several employers, several hundred residents, dozen or so, a little more than a dozen businesses within the district. All things that I think the city can be very, very proud of because it's a great success. I talked a little bit about the stakeholders today that were involved with the project. So we had an engagement process that was guided by a steering committee. The members are on the right. They consist of residents, business owners, other members of the community. Some folks that are directly living and working within the district, but some that are not, some are that are around the district. And we, for example, we reached out to make sure we had a young person. So Mary Ferrone, who's a student at Loris, I believe, or the university, is on the committee. And we thought that was it was important to have members such as herself, as well as property owners, on the steering committee. We conducted other events in order to get input, including focus groups. We met with an arts group, about 40 or 50 people. We were at the night market, and we conducted a survey together with the parking and mobility study, in which we got a little bit more than 600 responses. So the plan that you have in front of you, we hope, and we do believe, represents a pretty good broad cross-section of people involved in the community. So let's start with some market findings, some higher level market findings. So slow and steady growth has been what Dubuque and the region has been experiencing over the past 10 years or so. Within the district, housing actually has been strong. So developers indicated that they're bullish on housing in the district. However, in the past 10 years, those 200 units that were developed are larger units than actually we expected 13 years ago or so. At the time, we were expecting smaller units, but larger units came into the district, in part because it's redevelopment, and that's what you sort of have a certain shell to work with. Retail and commercial has been a little bit slower, and we're also facing the post-COVID new normal, which in effect, I mean, we don't know 100% what that means, but what I can tell you today, what it means is office construction, office absorption is very, very, very slow as the whole commercial real estate world is adjusting to a hybrid world or a remote world. And even if it bounces back to a good degree, the office is shrinking. It was shrinking before COVID. I can tell you, working in office, it kept getting smaller and smaller. So that's just a reality, I think, part of the new normal. Retail, whenever we talk about retail, we rely a lot on foot traffic. And we also believe that food sort of is replacing, if you've heard of the retail apocalypse and, thanks to Amazon and the internet, we think that a lot of the retail play is moving into food, not just, and also as food as something that's not just a daily event, but something for tourism and visitors as well. A couple other pieces on the market findings that I think are important. Dubuque is a modestly growing city in a modestly growing county, okay? You're not skyrocketing like Glendale, Arizona, nor plummeting like wherever. It's a modestly growing city, and interestingly, the city of Dubuque has captured 43% of the county's growth. When I came across that personally, I was surprised. I expected the growth to be more spread out. So 43% of the county's growth has been captured by the city over the past 10 years, I should say. It's also notable that of Dubuque County and the surrounding counties, Dubuque County is the only one that is not dropping in population. So you are picking up people from your hinterland, but you're also picking up people from larger cities beyond Dubuque. So in fact, the migration patterns will tell us that Des Moines and Chicago are two of the largest, in a sense, senders to Dubuque. Now that's partially because those are just big cities, but interesting observation nonetheless, I think. Another important number here is the 14% of households are quote unquote traditional. So by traditional, what I'm referring to is 2 parents and children, okay? There's nothing necessarily traditional about that, but I'm just using that word. But I think what's important about that is that 10 years ago, or maybe I think a little bit more, 15 years ago, that number was in the 20 to 25% range. Point is that households are changing, and that idea of 2 parents and child, yes, it exists, but as the country and demographics go through changes, it's a number that's declining significantly. And the reason why that matters is that the housing market meets the demand of households. And as households change, the housing market should be meeting it. It doesn't always do that. The final point I want to make is when we talk about district housing and the market of district housing, it comes from people, and this is sort of perhaps obvious, but I think worth pointing out, it comes from people who are both living in Dubuque today and people who will be moving to Dubuque. Now, of course, who else is there? Those two people. But the reason I bring that up is because people who are living in Dubuque today go through their changes in life, phases of life, and their household needs change. So the point here is that growth in a district or growth of the city, yes, it comes from, or the housing market, yes, it can come from people moving into the city, but it also comes from people in the city as they change through their phases of life, or their phases of life. Okay, so when we did our outreach to the community, we heard a couple higher line things. So from the residents who live in the district, they tell us they love the district. They love it. It's unique. They love bringing their family here, friends here. It's like no other place. However, after chatting with them for 20 minutes, they'll say, you know, it's great here, but there are a couple things that would make it feel more like a neighborhood. It'd be nice to have groceries. It'd be nice to have a simple lunch option. Doesn't mean they're moving, but it's what they tell us is lacking in the district today. And that's understandable. It's a new emerging neighborhood. From business owners in the district, from Dupaco and others, they tell us that the back to the office is actually doing well in this environment. People like to come back to this office. It is not sterile. It is unique. It's got energy, so it's doing quite well. From retailers, there's been a lot of turnover and a lot of transition amongst retailers, which is not uncommon, by the way. That is the nature of retail. However, the lack of foot traffic is definitely one of the challenges that retailers are dealing with. Those that are successful in the district are successful because they are, it's a prestigious location. It's an only location. And it works with several markets that they are attracted to. And they might be related to other things that are successful in districts, such as weddings, events, fundraisers. So they sort of feed off what's working within the district. Generally from neighbors and the general community of Dubuque, for some they tell us that the district's a destination. It's really cool, nothing like it. We love coming down here because you can't get this experience anywhere else in the city. But for others, it's not even on their radar. It's still very niche. It's not, we know it's there, but it's niche. It's not for me. From lenders and developers, we hear that they are bullish on housing, very bullish on hospitality, bullish on the district as a destination, but definitely less so for the aforementioned uses of retail and office, not surprisingly. So those are some of the things we heard. Some of the main findings, then I'll get into some detail. Number one, public space. The district, the buildings go from sidewalk to sidewalk. There's almost no public space aside from the sidewalk itself. A public space for gathering, for relaxation, for recreation is an important need in the district. Inclusivity came up and is another sort of main finding. Yes, it is a beloved place by the people who use it, but it does lack a broad cross-section of people across the month and across the year. So improving that would help. You can imagine how that would help retail, for example. Connectivity. Again, people know where the district is. They know it's that triangle, near Main Street. But cognitively and sort of psychologically, as you approach the district, there are edges and it's a little confusing. People often, if they don't get right to the center of it, to the parking ramp, it's a little confusing where to go. And that slight confusion continues when one's on foot because some of the buildings, the attractions don't have street presence because they're sort of internal complexes. Now, some of that can't be changed. The physical arrangement can't be changed, but wayfinding can certainly help with that. So connectivity is really important, not just within the district, but to other parts of the city. The district is gorgeous. It is beautifully restored. The buildings are lovely. The streets are really well done. But that's also created a slightly curated feel to the district. That kind of, and It's weird to say that, but sometimes when things are super well done, they're a little uncomfortable. So there's a sense to it that the district has a certain air of formality to it, which I think is one of the reasons why some residents around the city feel like it's niche and it's not for me. And then finally, amenity. The buildings themselves, again, were beautifully done, but there's no public space to enjoy in between. There's a very little amenity within the district to sort of augment the residents and the businesses. So the project broke down into these three main areas: culture, economy, and the built environment. And the plan itself has a series of specific recommendations within those categories. Hopefully, as you read the document, you can get a sense of the connectivity between those three elements and the importance of connecting these three elements to the broader city. So I'll go through some of those items in just a moment. So in terms of the main ideas of the plan itself, number one is to complete the redevelopment. Earlier, I showed the slide that showed about half the district is, in a sense, completed. So completing the other half is important. We think that that other half can support somewhere in the range of 400 new units of housing in 3 of the larger buildings. We do think these are tough, complicated, expensive projects, fortunately or unfortunately, and they do require the support of historic tax credits. We think it's important to extend those roads, or to redo the roads, I should say, to the southern portion of the district. And then also to infill, to think of the district as larger than the triangle and focus on infill new construction housing between the district and Main Street. So that space in between, which is about a 2 or 3 block gap. And we think that's important because of that idea of connectivity and that idea of broadening the base of the district. New construction attracts different people and can be targeted to different residents than redevelopment construction can. And then also, we think it's important to focus on recruiting another anchor tenant, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. Focusing on a few key amenities are important: simple food lunch options for people who are down there on a daily basis. The second one here is very important. We think it's essential to develop the historic Millwork District community space. And that is, I'll talk a little bit about this in a moment, but this is the space next to the Alamo building, essentially a park. Think about it just as a community space or as a park. So every time we talk about amenity and we talk about public space, this is in a sense what we're talking about. There are other main ideas that relate to enhancing connections and wayfinding, and then also to promoting the arts and placemaking. Hopefully together, these main ideas, you can see how they connect to the issue of serendipity, the issue of wayfinding, the issue of connectivity, etc. So I'll go through a couple of these in the 3 categories right off the bat. So within the built environment, one of the recommendations is to develop what we call here the tower-to-tower connection. Now, the tower-to-tower connection goes from the clock tower just on Main Street all the way down to the shot tower. It's the red line, actually it's the red line and then extended through to the Port of Dubuque on this map here. Now, this is a stretch goal. This is it cannot happen tomorrow. It requires, there's a lot of complexity to it, but we think when we look out 30, 40 years, this kind of connection as a pedestrian and a bike connection is really important for stitching together this district to downtown to the Port of Dubuque. So this red line connection would come through the district, connect with Commerce Avenue down to the shot tower. We recommend other improvements to all the existing connections up to downtown, whether that's 7th, 9th, 10th, or 11th Street, if they need new lighting, new sidewalks, etc. We think it's also important to focus on the bike connections to each of those areas as well. Again, the more ways people can get to the district, the more viable retail will be, the more desirable residential will be. And then also, though it may not seem like an issue of connectivity, we're recommending artful or underpasses and improved wayfinding. Again, just those are ways for the district to be less of an isolated element than it is today. So this is just a slide about primarily about the Millwork District community space that we're proposing to be located just next to the Alamo building and the existing ramp. This is a space that the three themes that we think are important are for it to be social, seasonal, and artful. So social in that it connects people within the district as well as visitors to the district. Seasonal, meaning it doesn't go to sleep in the winter. It can be activated in the winter time and in colder months. And artful, so that it, maybe it has a sense of almost whimsy to it or playfulness to it. Again, things that I don't think they run counter to what the district is. They complement the sort of formality of the district as it is today. Okay, couple recommendations that relate to the economy of the district. First of all, focusing on the redevelopment, for the continued redevelopment, which is really in four large buildings. Three of them are, we'll call them warehouse-type buildings, that the Wilmac, the Kirby, and the Farley-Letcher buildings. And we think those are tailor-made for apartment buildings, for housing, possibly for office if an anchor tenant came forward. But when I mentioned 400 units of housing, essentially those three buildings fits the 400 units. There's a fourth building, which is the lumber shed building. That's a free, large lofted space. It's not set up well for housing. That's the type of building that could become a real special use, perhaps related to entertainment, perhaps related to recreation, perhaps related to health. But that's a very special type building. It could also have multiple tenants in it, and perhaps is an excellent building for the next anchor tenant within the district. And then also I mentioned earlier the idea of new construction, not necessarily within the district itself, but rather on the numbered streets that connect the district to Main Street, so 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, et cetera. Those infill projects would be smaller, quite a bit smaller. They might be 12 units, they might be 36 units. They're small, maybe as many as 50 or 60, but not much more than that. And what's important about these projects is that, again, they attract a different resident because they are smaller buildings, probably lower amenity buildings. And they also, what they also do, which I think is very important, is they improve the pedestrian environment between the district and Main Street. And that connectivity is really important. It's never going to get shorter. It's not even that long. It's only 3 blocks. But it can get a lot more pleasant. And as these new buildings face onto it with active fronts or interesting facades and nice sidewalks, that distance between Main Street and the district perceptually gets quite a bit smaller. And then finally, within the area of culture, we have a handful of recommendations in this section as well. So the steering committee talked a lot about how this district has so much to teach others, but we need a way to, we need more ways to tell the story of the district. So creating educational opportunities for people to learn about the history and the current happenings of the district is very important. We think that would help bring in yet more people into the district. And that can happen in many ways. That can happen through, and should happen in many ways. Interpretive signage, educational tours that are both online and in person, events, etc. So this is sort of a package of recommendations that speak to using how the district can be used to educate a wide group of people, visitors, as well as current residents of Dubuque. And then finally, to support opportunities for expanded performance, visual arts presence in the district. And again, you can see how this, hopefully you can see how this complements the formality of the sort of physical structure of the district. So some ideas such as an artist in residence program for the district, I think would be a very interesting way, not just to promote the arts, but also to help to continue the interpretation of the artful qualities of the district. Bringing in artwork into the district, we think is very important. In particular, into the aforementioned community space next to the Millwork district. That's a space, by the way, that is visible from the highway, whether you're coming to the district or not coming to the district. So there's a certain, I think there's a big opportunity there for signature artwork. And then also, when we think about recruiting businesses, it's not just large anchor tenants. The district has a history of making stuff, right? And that's what it was originally. So there are buildings and spaces within the district that could fit artisan, small manufacturing companies, which I think would be, again, a nice way, not just to pay homage to the history of the district, but also to diversify the economic base of the future of the district. So I think that's what I got. Hopefully I gave you the basis of the plan, the top line efforts of the plan, and then just maybe a level down. And I'm available for questions or to sit back and let you discuss. Which would you prefer?
All right. Well, thank you. We'll probably do a little bit of both.
Okay.
So it'll be perfect. All right. I'll open it up for thoughts and questions. Yeah, Ms. Roussel.
Thank you. You've given us a lot of things to think about. And one of the things that caught my attention was you mentioned that it's not on the radar for many people. So I didn't hear any specific ideas on how to fix that. Could you share some thoughts?
Sure. I think I have two thoughts that are, and they're sort of baked into the plan. One is an anchor tenant that would, related perhaps to recreation or entertainment, that would draw a new group of folks into the district. Now, an arts related, think of a theater, for example. Theaters they're bringing in 75 people every night, or whatever it might be, and then those 75 people change depending on the performance. So it's sort of like a wave coming in and out constantly. So that's one way to enhance it on the radar of general people. The other is the park space itself. That space should be designed not just to support the existing activities in the district, but to be a destination in and of itself. It's not just a place to spend time in between two things in the district. It's such a wonderful place. You just go there because it's interesting, because it's a fun place to be. So I think those are the two main items that would enhance it on the radar of the people for whom it's not currently on.
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, Mr. Jones.
I think you're spot on the wayfinding and the status of the situation. Had the privilege of being with a large group of non-Dubukers touring Dubuque a week and a half ago. And the district was one of the stops on the step-on, step-off bus tour. I didn't step off with them, but it was kind of billed as a shopping experience. And the negative comments were, well, if it was, there was really nothing open that time of the morning. But the positive comments were, they were just awestruck. These are people from all over the globe at how fabulous the streetscapes were, how fabulous the buildings looked. But they didn't see any signage that would welcome into any of those interior spaces that you were talking about needing wayfinding for. So you're spot on with all of that. But it was I wasn't sure what the reaction would be to that particular tour site, and was pretty pleased with most of what I heard as people came back on the boat.
I paid some close attention coming in last night at the signage, not the signage. I was coming in on 52, so down the river. And there is somewhat of first of all, there's no signage for the district itself on the highway or anything. There's well, you know what it is. But it's a bit of a potpourri of signage as you approach the city and then even within the city. And it's not that, I think that some editing and auditing would be useful for the visitor experience. The other thing that I often think about is when one is coming to the district, well, this is a kind of a parking comment, because when people say there's no parking, that it's usually not enough parking. It's usually about I can't find the available parking. But what typically happens is highways are easy to navigate, arterials are easy to navigate. What's really hard is that in-between space between getting to a place and getting to the parking lot. And if you think of, I don't know if some parking garages at airports, for example, they'll tell you how many spots are available on each level, right? So you make your choice to go to the one with 50 spaces or the one with 3, it's your choice. But it's clear, you're going up a ramp, and cities need that same thing. They need, as you approach a district, you need to be told, and maybe it's on the app or maybe it's just signage, you need to be told, park here. Ideally, with the available number of spaces. But that, when people say they're uncomfortable in the city or scared in the city, which, as city residents, you might not, well, I live here, but it's the confusion, that goes with being in a car and not knowing where to go. And that confusion can quickly become a turnoff. So simple signage is really important.
Ms. Farber and then Mr. Resnick.
So I noticed in your plan update that you had a near-term 1 to 3 year recommendation, so you had that chart. I think it's on page 48, to be exact. Is there thought, or have you created a potential budget or a potential phased-in finance that could accompany all of those recommendations?
We haven't done that yet. If that is an important element, I'd be happy to work on that. So that's
a to be determined,
yeah,
based upon who is your partner with. Yeah. I mean, I thought the document was really so well done, very articulate, and really, I very much enjoyed the past to the present. The history, I thought that was great, and the driftless area, things like that. That brought us to our future development. But I didn't see any dollar signs attached to any of this, and I know that this is a plan and an update to what can be done and kind of the phased-in approach to how we would take a look at this. And I realize that there's not a lot of partnership or public information about financing, so I just wanted to raise that to see how you plan to bring that to our attention, or what your thoughts are about what it would take to get this kicked off.
Well, certainly continued partnerships with the private sector. I mean, they have a role and the city has a role, for sure. Their role is to bring private capital and some type of leadership, in the public sector role is public infrastructure. But this is an interesting area in which there's overlap in everything, which I think is good, actually. So we can begin to put together an initial budget for some of the public realm investments, the near-term public realm investments, as well as some of the, a little more detail on some of the partnerships that we think would be valuable to implement these early phase pieces, if you think that would be valuable.
Well, I would leave that up to Mr. Mayor and how we would want to approach this, but I was not here 10 years ago, so I'm not quite sure how this all got kicked off to begin with, and just was wondering what the next steps might be for our consideration and for the partners to consider as well. I think it's a great project, and I really like the thought behind all of the dimensions and all the tentacles that you have, especially for the restoration section of the downtown and how it could be a neighborhood. Yeah. And I've lived in cities all my life in apartment buildings, so I really enjoy the fact that you can stay in your hood and take care of all your services and take care of all your culture and all your lifestyle needs as well as your working needs. So thank you very much.
Mr. Resnick.
Thank you very much. So I was interested in your topic and the way you spoke about things, especially the sense of space that you have. So when we go to We're lucky enough to go to London occasionally, and central London has a very wide and open and surprisingly quiet area that people walk through, and they have there's courtyards and pocket parks and wide pedestrian byways, and you're in this huge city, and yet there's a wide open feeling that I wish we could have at the Millwork, which, you mentioned that the buildings go right up to the sidewalks. And we do have this one thing, a public passageway by DePatco, and that's wonderful, but they're all over. And the people who have private property don't mind having people traverse through their gate, through their area to get other places. There's kind of a welcoming atmosphere in that. And so I noticed that. And sometimes my wife doesn't want to go to a place because there's no place to land. There's no place to land. Where can we go? And this neighborhood looks like it needs a place to land, so that you could look around and take your time and maybe go to dinner, come back to the park, and there's another spot that we could visit here and just relax and have a place to land. So I like your idea about that and ideas to do it. On the old plan that 2009, on page 7, there's a rendering, and just east of the community area that you're talking about, there's a Verdon Park that is no longer on this because we have that intermodal system. So that's kind of really out of the way, though. Something in the middle. Could you tell me what's going on with Genwell, that building, and is that also in the mix of things to?
Genweld meaning the lumber shed building?
The building with all the blue pipes on it.
Oh, so there's a well, I guess you can see it here. Can you see my hand on your screen? You can? Okay. So this is the lumber shed building, right? And Geldwend used to be the complex of these three blocks. So this block, and this block. So that was the Geldwend complex. And those crazy blue pipes, those shot like sawdust from one building to the next, or that was like the vacuum system or something like that.
And sometimes fire.
What's that?
And sometimes fire.
And sometimes fire, I'm sure, yeah.
Blowing the fire down the block.
Yeah. Interestingly, to me, from a visual standpoint, actually, this is a bit of a side, but everything's so formal, and those blue pipes were sort of, again, kind of a complement to the formality of things, and it added some color and some kind of lack of logic to everything. But it was, anyway. So those, so these three blocks are the Geldwend property, former Geldwend complex. There are, I think, 8 different buildings on this block with, I think, like 6 different building owners. So those are all small-ish buildings that all, I think most of them are adaptable to housing, I think. Most of them are. I think maybe one might not be, the Kiln building. But generally speaking, I see a future of them as mostly housing. They could house like small manufacturing on that block. This block over here is, it looks like multiple buildings. I think it's really only 2 buildings. I think it's the Clower building, I think. And that actually is the building that's really well suited for a local small manufacturer. Because that's what it used to be, and it's single story. That's suited really well for it. The lumber shed building is this one. And this building actually was used in the 1923, I think it is, State World's Fair in St. Louis. And it was disassembled, brought up here, reassembled. And it's a spectacular building, but that's the building that is sort of, it's such an oddball building. It's going to have a very special and unique tenant or series of tenants. I think it's best suited for like something recreational, something entertainment. It's not well suited for offices, maybe a couple, but that's the one building that I think can be a destination as well as an amenity. Have a tenant that's both a destination for others as well as an amenity for the district.
So I'll cut to the chase and say that the blue pipe building, somebody owns that and they want to redevelop that, they're not going to say, hey, that would be a great open space park.
No, I don't think so. I have not heard any interest in demolition of those buildings.
Deconstruction,
Yeah,
right?
I have not.
Okay, so it's going to be crowded with buildings, and so we need to find a good way to have a place to land and people to move through comfortably, not worrying about traffic. And you've considered all these things, right? Moving people through. We're not going to close any streets for walking or pedestrians.
No, I don't think so. Not on a permanent basis. I mean, I can imagine for events, you could close them down, close some of them down. But many of these roads are still roads to and from the highway, right? So those remain open.
So is there a hope for a place to land in this?
Well, I think that, if landing consists of coming to the district in a sort of comfortable, not confusing way, getting out of your car and being able to sort of see the district, if that's what landing is, the intermodal ramp connected right to an adjacent park is, I think, a perfect landing spot. Very comfortable place to sort of arrive, get oriented, take a breath, and then experience the district.
Great.
Because it'll be a green park.
And thank you. And right now, like DuPaco, they have a public space almost, a welcoming space right away in the basement when you walk in. And there's a nice public area. It's not really public, but it feels like it.
Yeah.
Right, a welcoming area. And maybe the other buildings would have to do something like that too. I don't know, in redevelopment.
Yeah. And for the whole district, however, this community space, this park in front of the Alamo building and right next to the parking garage is a perfect landing space, I think.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Ms. Wethel.
Just a couple of comments. I really appreciated the report itself has a lot of information in it that I don't want to say it was all new to me. It certainly it was things that I had heard about potential plans, but it was a nice summary and well organized. So thank you very much. The Alamo Building Public Park area to me is an answer of decreasing formality. And one thing we really haven't covered at all is how to make the Millwork District more family friendly.
Yeah.
To me, that isn't an untouched piece of the Millwork District. There's nothing there for me to go do with my kids that would take family there. So having the Alamo Building Park to me is an essential piece of the Millwork District, period. Because if that park is there, that will draw families there, that would draw retail there, that would draw maybe more lunchtime restaurants. A lot of people go out for lunch with their kids or brunch with their kids, but they don't go out to formal dinners. So just things of how to make it a family-friendly space. I want families to live there, but they're not going to live there if there's nowhere for their kids to go play outside. To that same idea, the areas, and I'm sorry, I don't remember what slide it was, but you had kind of carved out new opportunities outside of the Millwork District for new housing. To me, some of that needs to be green space thought out as well.
Needs to be
green space.
Oh, okay.
People aren't going to want to live in a building without green space next to it. And I feel like I know that that's a code issue as well, but to me, we're not thinking of what really brings young families into that space. And green space to me is something that's going to be a necessity unless we just want people who are wealthy and retired or, we're just really, that's to me the untouched market of the millwork. So.
And interesting, there's a school, Prescott, is it Prescott School? 2 blocks from, is that a grade school, I assume? Elementary? So it's, often in downtowns when they're trying to attract families, the problem is there's no school. So that's problem solved here. In some cities, well, I shouldn't say some cities, I'm familiar. I worked in Toronto years ago, and they had a requirement at the time that 10% of all, I think it was 10% or some percentage of that, of all housing had to be what they called ground related. Essentially, in each ground related unit had to have X amount of outdoor space associated with it. And the X wasn't real big. But the point is, like a townhouse with a very small yard is ground related. And they deemed that as city policy a necessary thing to ensure that downtown has families living in it. And they did interesting things like you could create ground actually up in the air, meaning like a rooftop could be qualify as ground related, right? So that housing in between the district and downtown, I called it's smaller lots. Yeah. It actually would set itself up well for townhouses, particularly because it's also going up a hill slightly, I think. Yeah, it's going up a hill slightly, and townhouses can be staggered. They can kind of step up a hill quite easily. So that's certainly a possibility with that infill housing, townhouse construction, which would be, townhouse construction tends to be 3 stories, 2 to 3 bedrooms, ground related, that sounds family to me. Yeah.
Just a couple other thoughts. The promotion of artful spaces. That's one thing that I think is really impressive about the Dupaco Voices building, and Mr. Resnick commented on it in specifically when the poem booth was down there. Cool. My kids could not leave that alone.
Yeah.
And it was something that literally they would come a block or 2 out of the way just to go to the poem booth. Mm-hmm. I think there's a piano still there. Yeah. And so my godson sat down and started playing piano. It's the greatest thing, but it brings people into that space to put something that they can see there, or a destination even within that way. So I loved how through the Dupaco alleyway and then into the Cradco alleyway, and how that could carry forward. To me, that's such a beautiful place to build community, and but we have to put destinations in there to bring people and draw them in. So the artfulness, maybe it's much of what we're doing with Art on the River, where we put exhibited pieces there, maybe rotationally or something. It's a neat opportunity to fill that space. Then finally, you talked a lot about the recruitment of an anchor tenant for the lumber shed within the presentation and the document. I need to know what we need to do as a council to do that. I mean, I agree, it's wonderful, it's a great idea, but to me, that's not going to just come along easily. That's going to have to be sought after.
I should also clarify, I think I verbally linked the idea of anchor tenant with the lumber shed. The idea of an anchor tenant, it can happen in other buildings as well.
Sure.
So I want to make sure I'm clear about that. So if another Dupaco type business or office type business who wanted to take up 60,000 square feet came forward and was interested in the Kirby or the Wilmette, that's fine. That's fine. But I think the idea of recruiting, so this is about recruiting an anchor tenant. It's finding a business in town that wants to be in the district. And it seems to me that is a sort of a joint effort between the city, between Main Street, and I don't know, maybe GDDC as well. Maybe the anchor tenant is related to one of the universities. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's a existing business that wants to grow. Maybe it's someone who is looking for a Midwest office or Midwest location for their first venture in the Midwest. It can come from within the community. It can come from outside the community. But it's a recruiting effort, and it's a message that we have these spaces available, and the city is willing to, incentivize and do what needs to be done to attract the right kind of anchor tenant. I do think an anchor tenant, the best anchor tenant will be both an amenity for those who live there, as well as an attraction for others, I think. That's my opinion. So you can think of a recreational venture or an entertainment venture that is both a reason for me to want to live there, but also a reason for me just to want to go there. I think that's actually the best kind of a anchor tenant.
Thank you.
Well, this has been very thought-provoking. I mean, thank you very much for bringing this and for completing this plan, going through this work. A few questions that build on the questions here, and then I also want to make sure that I summarize a little bit because I'm trying to keep track of some of the things that we have here. So maybe I'll start with the summary. I think one of the big questions for us is, do we want to move this forward as a council to then adopt it at a future meeting? I think is the big question. And I'm not hearing that we don't necessarily, unless somebody's thinking, absolutely not, this is not what I want to see. I think this is, if we have, because Jill pointed out, if you want to put this on an agenda to be able to bring it forward and actually adopt it, then that would be something we would, that's kind of the big question. Then there are some other things that I think kind of go along with that and how we would work with this as a council and encourage staff to move it forward, which also could be tied to goal setting. When we think about, a lot of times in past goal setting sessions, we've adopted a master plan or, and found ways to try to push a master plan forward in some way. Chaplain Schmidt Island is a perfect example. So some of the ideas I heard there were this idea of an artist program, recruitment of businesses, natural space, including trees, places where trees can be planted and more natural space can be had. Let's see, what else? Street conversions to the two-way and one-way. That's a big question with White and Central. That's come up in the Central Avenue discussion as well. How do people move from place to place? So not just in a car, not just in public transportation, but then also through walking and once they park, and then biking potentially, any other ways that people might be able to move, which also is tied to signage and wayfinding and things like that. So I kind of gathered those as some of the main things that we've been discussing. With all that, one of the questions that I have, one of the biggest questions for me is this idea of incentivizing development in this area. We've been pretty successful so far in this past year of incentivizing housing in general in the city of Dubuque. But when we talk about incentivizing something like this, and I'm looking at these buildings that you circled specifically, and those specific buildings have specific owners. I guess, question one is, do we have a sense that these specific owners of specific buildings are interested in developing those properties? And if so, then what are developers telling us that they need as incentives to be able to move this forward? Historic tax credits are obviously a big piece of this puzzle, and that makes me nervous because we currently live in a political environment where we hear the term historic tax credit under attack on a regular basis because the idea of a tax credit of any sort in some ways is kind of becoming a bad word. We don't really want to talk about that, so we're seeing an erosion of historic tax credits, at least in our state, and that is concerning for a place like this. Yeah. But in general, I guess, so I'll try to put that all in one question. In general, when we talk about incentives, are we hearing from developers in this process that they're interested in developing these specific properties, and what would they need to be able to do that? What can the city of Dubuque, a public entity, do to be able to help that? And I see Jill standing behind you too to help answer this question. So just so you're not all on your own, you can tag team.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks for that question. That's a really important one. As far as historic tax credits go, we think it's important for the city to continue to advocate for those. We have done that in the past. They've landed in our state and federal legislative priorities, and they will continue to be. Another thing that we see is some opportunities maybe through the federal money that's been coming down the pipeline over the past few years. Look at applying for some grants. One of the things that really generated the first wave of development was the city coming in and doing the public improvements. So the utilities and the streets. That's something that hasn't happened on the south half of the district yet. And that was something that we were able to accomplish through a Tiger grant, provided a lot of money that then became the Build grant and now the Raise grant. different names under different administrations. But that is one possibility, is for us to apply for some different types of funding and financing at other levels, both public and private. As far as are the developers, the building owners interested in developing, I think that, in the conversations that we've had, the answer is yes, and dependent on us being able to partner with them so that it's not just all on their dime, it's a partnership.
Okay. That's very helpful, Jill. Thank you. I don't know if you have anything to add to that answer. It's okay if the answer is no. Okay. Yeah, that is really helpful because I think it's an important question. When we talk about doing these things, this is kind of I always have a little bit of a half joke when somebody comes up to me and says, you know what we need in Dubuque? We need a this. And my joke is always, you should open one. Like that's kind of always my standard, but I'm only half joking because if they want to open one, that'd be great. But the other question is, how do you incentivize that to get to that place specifically? And I think when I'm, walking into goal setting here in a few weeks, that's on my brain, that's a big question because I think that whatever role we can play to incentivize some of the things that we're talking about here that seem to connect to other parts of downtown and the other parts of the city, that's the role we can play, aside from just encouraging and hoping that the private sector will step in and do some of this work too. So that's very helpful to know that. Looking for the infrastructure pieces of this, that's a good thing to know that there are some areas that we can still do that because that is a really active way that we can jump in, and there's likely going to be the possibility, at least, of going after some of those grants if that's something that we prioritize. It also makes me think about the fact that we're already doing that in one way, connecting it with the RAISE grant that's going to be connecting this and Schmidt Island and the rest of the North End in a really important way. Okay, so that's one question. My other one is a really random question, but I didn't see it come up. Airbnbs and VRBOs, do we have any sense at all? We've got a bunch of apartments and things like that. Do we have a sense, and this is a question for just about anybody, of how many of these apartments that are there that we'd like to call living space are actually short-term rentals?
We don't know that answer right now. Airbnb was just starting to become more popular 10 years ago when some of these first units were coming online. You can find a few of them online. But I'm pretty sure that we have in our agreements, I couldn't quote you the language saying that they have to be housing units. We're not expecting to, if they use our incentives to create the housing, the $10,000 a unit, we're not giving you $10,000 to create an Airbnb.
Right.
That doesn't make sense.
But our challenge is that we are preempted from being able to stop any development that isn't tied to us with incentives.
Yep.
We can't stop anybody from creating that short-term rental space necessarily.
Right.
Which is a challenge for us because so the answer is no. We don't have any idea how many of these units are that way if they're not tied to us. Do we have any way to find out?
Go on Airbnb and
So literally
VRBO.
just do an inventory.
I've looked,
start
but
rifling
there
through.
are so many now compared to if you had looked 5 years ago. You could count them.
Yeah.
And now it'd be tricky.
So I just want to point out that's a big deal. That's a really big challenge for a city our size. If we are going to try to create spaces that are going to be infill housing in a downtown area because we have this idea in our head that we want more volume of people there, living there so they can have more amenities and it's a chicken and egg game, it's an absolute numbers race to try and build more housing and create more housing so that we just sort of make more housing than anybody could ever make Airbnbs and have them survive in the city of Dubuque. And it is a race. That's really what it is. It's really challenging.
Right, and I think that gives us an opportunity as staff to try to develop ways in our development agreements to make it tougher for them to do that. There's always the enforcement as far as us identifying the fact that it is being used as an Airbnb. How do you monitor that?
Right.
But it gives us the opportunity to think now of, what you're saying and see what kind of language we can get in the agreements.
Yeah. Go ahead, and in the mic.
If I may, a couple things about Airbnbs. The irony is when you have a lot of Airbnbs, it sort of indicates there's a lot of desire to be there. But a couple of things about it. The data's hard because even though you can go on Airbnb right now and see what's out there, it doesn't mean they're being rented. A lot of people just put it up and if someone knocks on their door, they'll, so vacancy numbers are almost impossible to come by. So just if you see a lot of units, it doesn't mean that they're being used. It doesn't mean they're not being used, but that's just one of the things. The other thing about Airbnb or that kind of whole class of things, I don't think it's going to happen in Dubuque for a little while, but someday someone will develop a building designed and intended to be an Airbnb building. We have that in Minneapolis already, and it's like a 75-unit building or something like that, and it is exclusively short-term rentals. So I don't think that's going to happen for a little bit in Dubuque, but it's in that same category of, you're getting the building, but you're not getting the sort of full investment of residents. This isn't like an anti-visitor issue.
Right.
But it's something to be on the radar.
Yeah,
for
and
sure.
I want to make it really clear that I am not in any way saying that short-term rentals are inherently bad. It's a very good thing for a city like Dubuque.
Yes,
very
yes,
good.
Yes, definitely.
But what I am saying is that it is absolutely a challenge of balancing that with the housing that we have, the density that you want in a downtown area, and making that work at the same time that you're making housing work and making business work and all these things. This is the very interesting mathematical equation that we have to play with when we think about all these big things. So, okay, we are at quarter till. This has been a great discussion. I think we have enough to work with to be able to move forward and put this on an agenda for adoption and discussion further. Unless there's any other clarifying questions we need from council members, and I'll let council go first, and then actually, Jill, go ahead. What do you
I did want to mention, I appreciated Ms. Farber's comments about some of the economics. There have been conversations with Chris Brewer from, what's the name of his? AECOM. And he's done a lot of work with some different projects in Dubuque, and he has advised on that information that's been in here. But I do want to go back and give ourselves an opportunity to insert some more details into the plan.
What this could look like from a budgetary standpoint,
Right.
what the cost might be.
Right.
Okay, great. Thank you. Mr. Jones.
Just wanted to remind everybody that we also have a smart parking community mobility study occurring right now, and want to make sure that your thoughts on parking get into that conversation and vice versa. So let's make sure that you get briefed on that by somebody and debrief somebody on that.
I've worked closely with the parking team, the consultant firm that's doing this. They took a pretty deep dive into the district to understand the dynamics of it. And it's complicated, but to boil it down, the expectation for everyone to be able to park in the middle of the district needs to change. The expectation should be that some people, that there's space in the middle of the district, but there's a lot of space on the periphery of the district. And I don't think that's going to be difficult transition to make, but I think that's an important adjustment in the expectations.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. If I'm going to Chicago to see a show, an 8 or 10 block walk feels like a pretty good parking place.
Yeah, right. And we're not talking 8
To
or 10
feel a
blocks.
show, if I can't, step onto the curb and enter the building, I'm disappointed. That
Right,
seems to be the characteristic of our colleagues in town here. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yep. All right, any other clarifying questions or needs before we move on here? Okay. Well, thanks everyone for the discussion. Thank you both very much for the presentation and the plan. Look forward to seeing more in the near future.
Thank you very much.
All right. With that, Trish, we can move along.